actually important because this is the patch where a lot of qualifiers for the World Championship are going to be played, so a ton of the regional finals will be played on this patch. So let's see what we have in store here. So Infiniteam, Lasercorps, and Jhin, these are going to be in the S tiers. There's a bit of a shuffle up from last week, and metas always develop when people are like really trying hard in the current patch and people are trying to like innovate and also trying to counter what was popular in the previous week. You may notice that in the S tier that there aren't too many comps right now, and that's because most things are pretty well in line with each other. There's nothing that's like egregiously overpowered or anything that's like super bad. But moving on into the A tier, we have Gnar Reroll, Spellslinger. Spellslinger, I think, is like one of my favorite comps right now. Threats, Star Guardian Kaisa, Mech Sureshot, drop down a little bit. Same with Duelists. Anima Misfortune. This one is a little bit weird. I'm going to be coming out with the Anima Misfortune video, 3-hour compilation, showing different games from Iron all the way to Diamond. Posting that sometime this weekend, hopefully on Saturday tomorrow. So subscribe for that if you want notifications. Built different comp, Ashe Reroll, Mascot Vex, Jax, Lulu Reroll, and then Yasuo Reroll rounding it out. So pretty balanced, couple of reroll comps, couple of 4-cost comps, couple of like vertical trait comps like Infiniteam and Lasercorps right now. Some of the more like horizontal comps such as Mech Sureshot, maybe like the threat comp. And then moving on into the B and C tier, these are just like general reroll comps that just aren't quite in the meta right now. But let's move on into the actual team compositions and we'll go over how to play each and every one of them. So Infiniteam Sureshots. So we haven't visited this comp in a while, but it is back. Not because it got stronger, but mainly because everything else got weaker. Sometimes that's how life works, you know? But the most important thing, you may have noticed already, on the right-hand side, best augments, we see Infiniteam Crown, Infiniteam Crest, and Infiniteam Heart. So you may be wondering, like, why is this comp kind of rising up a little bit? Well, if we look at Gadeteen and Lasercorps augments, you may have noticed in the recent B patch that they were actually removed and can't be seen on stage 2-1 and 3-2 and can only be seen on stage 4. Whereas Infiniteams, they kind of stayed the same. And this trait is one of those that are very reliant on having like a +1 to the synergy. So that's one reason why it's a bit strong. Another reason is there's kind of like an easy flow to everything. If you get a good opener for this, the tricky part is getting like an Ashe early on and a Sivir. That way you have the item holder in the Ashe and you have the Sivir for Infiniteams with Pantheon and Lucian. If you ever get a setup like that, it's pretty easy to play just because you flow into like your 2-cost, 3-cost, and then finally 4-cost pretty easily with the team. And there's always kind of stuff you could be rolling for at different stages, but we'll go into the rolling patterns in just a bit. So if you do have an Infiniteam start with Pantheon, Lucian, and someone else, again, you can like easily transition into like the vertical synergy later on. And then in the mid game, if you have the +1 Infiniteam, you unlock 2 extra units without needing Twisted Fate, which is completely huge. Like this team comp is probably like A tier without a +1, and then it's like S tier with the +1. It's just that straightforward. One little interesting part before we scroll down a little bit is that the main tank is actually Garen, who is not an Infiniteam unit. And that's just because he's also a defender along with Shen, and he's just going to be doing the main parts of the tanking. You don't need to duplicate him because Infiniteam doesn't affect the individual units, it just makes one of the clones. So generally when you play Infiniteams, you want to play more for the sure shot variant, so you do like a Samira carry. Again, ironic because like your main carries are not Infiniteam units. Unless of course you get Ezreal. You can see from the hero augments up here, like the 2 Ezreal ones are the best just because finding him is so difficult. So you mainly just take the Ezreal augment, not because it's good, but just because it gives you an Ezreal. I should kind of rephrase that. It is good, but you're not taking it for Ezreal's effect. You're mainly taking it just to get him. So the other way to play this is to build around your Twisted Fate, but it's really a lot weaker. So I wouldn't recommend really doing that. But in a worst case scenario, you got to do what you got to do. Next up, if you do get an Infiniteam crest, great holders for it is like Garen, Aatrox, Fiddlesticks, Mordekaiser. If you do Mordekaiser, make sure you're not running Samira because they kind of clash with the Ace trait. But if the Hex is in the backline, you're mainly using Ezreal, even though you could consider using Samira, though I prefer just having 3 items on my Samira instead. Other options are Aurelion Sol or Bel'Veth. And then like, yeah, Ezreal's just the best one by far. 4 items, you really just need attack damage items onto your Samira. And the only mandatory item is Last Whisper. So it's Last Whisper and then any other 2 items. I will note right now, like attention everybody, this is the BunnyMuffins tip of the day. We're going to be doing it earlier right now. There is a glitch going on with Infinity Edge on Samira. They might hotfix it. So but at the time of recording, do not build Infinity Edge on Samira, but if it is fixed, it is a very good item on her. You may be asking, what can you build instead? You could build a Giant Slayer, you could build like a Hextech Gunblade, you could build like a Guard Breaker, you could build a Deathblade, you could build like a Runon's Hurricane. Lots of different things you could kind of try out. Hand of Justice, Edge of Night. So that's like 6 options for you all to choose from. But other things you can go for is like attack damage items on Ezreal. Ezreal and Samira pretty much use the same items. And then Twist of Fate, we have a big list here. It's just Static Shiv and then a bunch of like ability power or general damage items. Moving on into the augments, and obviously we're going to spend more time reviewing the S tier comps and then with the A and B tiers. And then for the A and B tiers, we'll do more of like a quick overview. But because this team composition uses a lot of expensive units, we see 1, 2, 3, 4 cost units, and then 2 5 cost units. Having high-end shopping and level up, if you have like a lot of gold, really helps you to find all these units. And then in case you all did not know or missed the previous video where I went over like an old BunnyMuffins tip of the day, is for cybernetics, because I list cybernetic uplink and implants here, your Infiniteam unit benefits from the cybernetic trait only if the original unit that's getting cloned is holding an item. So you know how the cloned units always hold items? Well, they don't get the cybernetic bonus unless the original unit holds an item. So just keep that in mind whenever you're playing this build if you care about maximizing the cybernetic buff. Let's move on into the Lasercorps comp now. So Lasercorps is another one of those trait-based comps, and the version we have here is with 4 brawlers. Some people play it with Hacker, but I think the 4 brawler version is like maybe slightly stronger. But the main idea of the team composition is just to survive. You really only care about the Lasercorps trait. That's going to be your main damage dealer. And the team comp focuses much more on survivability. So on your Warwick, you have like Bloodthirster, Edge of Night, Titan's Resolve over things like a Last Whisper, because you don't really need Warwick to kill things. You just need the trait to kill things, like the Lasercorps trait. So just play the units, and then that's why 4 brawlers is pretty good, because they're there for survivability. And that's pretty much all you have to do with this build. So for item holders, Draven and Jax are probably like the best ones. I don't like using Yasuo that much, but he is like one of those worst case scenarios. But Draven is great in the early game because he is an ace, so he kind of fits in with any team. So you don't have to play what you see here in order to play the comp. You could play like Draven plus like 2 defender, Draven plus 2 brawler, or even some wacky combination of synergies. Jax is also a good option later on because you do eventually want to end up playing brawlers, so he kind of fits in there. So you can play 4 brawlers with Jax until you reach the late game. And Bel'Veth is also solid as well if you get an early Bel'Veth. Bel'Veth is just really good in the early game in general. She just kind of gets weaker as the game goes on, at least in my opinion. Mordekaiser is where like the comp really comes online because he gives you 5 or 6 Lasercorps, and that's really the big power spike of the comp. 6 Lasercorps is like a free top 4. 5 Lasercorps, you're still fighting for it, but it's still pretty solid, which is why this comp is in the S tier. And then down here, we just have some notes about Hacker, but 4 items, it's just mainly survivability for Warwick. Ionic Spark is pretty useful. You could spark either the Blitzcrank, Garen, or like the Mordekaiser. I know Mordekaiser has built-in Magic Shred, but until you get him, because you're not guaranteed to get a Mordekaiser every game, sometimes it's just useful to have the magic resist shredding before you get him. Other things to consider is, apart from the Lasercorps related augments, Ancient Archives is really good because you have a chance of getting the Lasercorps spatula. Celestial Blessing or any healing is good for Warwick. Second Wind is probably another decent option because you're running brawlers. It's just like a very good augment for brawlers in general. And that's pretty much going to be it. I believe we have other ones listed down here. No, they're kind of the same thing. But sometimes like you can't fit 3 augments there. So for some of the other comps, there may be more here. But let's move on into Jhin Renegades, because this comp is a little more interesting because throughout most of the set, Jhin has kind of not been that popular. Kind of picked it up last week, and then now he definitely is like one of the mainstays. So in a Renegade comp, you just want to play either 3 or 5 Renegades, preferably 5, just because it's easy to fit in. Viego works really well with Alistar, which works really well with Vex for Mascot. So if you're playing Riftwalker, like the base is going to be Jhin, Pyke, and Vex. And then Hacker's kind of too hard to fit in and no one really needs it, so you don't really follow Pyke's synergies, but you could add in an Alistar for Vex's synergy. So Alistar's a no-brainer, Viego's a no-brainer, and then the rest can kind of be flex. Camille and Leona, they could be any 2 random units before you get them, and then Fiddlesticks is obviously also replaceable by anyone. Ideally, you obviously still aim for 5 Renegade, but having 3 is perfectly fine. You could just run Viego, Jhin, and then have the Riftwalker, Zac, also be a Renegade. But let's move on into the how to play sections. So you pretty much flex into this comp because you're playing for like attack damage items, and there are a lot of options open for you. So the issue with Renegades is that you don't really have a good attack damage item holder. I guess Camille kind of is one, but Camille isn't that great unless you like have Hacker on her or something like that, or just play around her as like a reroll comp. So you don't really have like a smooth transition compared to other teams because there just aren't other Riftwalkers that can hold these items, and there aren't any Renegades that can hold Jhin items either. In my unranked to diamond video from last week, we saw that someone put attack damage items on Lucian, and I pointed out how it was a mistake due to how his scaling works and how attack damage works in set 8.5. So instead, what people generally do is use stuff like Draven. Draven is just, again, as we talked about before, just a pretty solid attack damage item holder, probably one of the more popular ones. And then worst case, use a Camille, and then sometimes you sell Camille when you have to replace her and find a new one. But this comp is pretty good if you're just running random stuff in your early game. So for example, we talked about like just having like 2 defenders and 2 damage dealers, perfectly fine for this comp. 2 brawlers, 2 damage dealers, perfectly fine for this comp as well in stage 2. And then you kind of slowly transition into this comp once you hit some key units. So you can flex between the Jhin comp, the Bel'Veth comp, and the Samira comp, and that kind of keeps your options pretty open whenever you're going for this, because you just rush a Last Whisper, all 3 of those comps use that item, and then whatever forecast you hit, that's what you go for that game. So it's pretty straightforward, and then Viego can hold the ability power items. Viego isn't the primary carry, it's definitely Jhin as the primary carry, but Viego is definitely not too shabby himself. Similar to the first comp we went over, high-end shopping is pretty good because we have a lot of expensive units. There are 2 legendaries, we have 2 forecast units, and you could play for either like some of the other units such as like Samira and Bel'Veth as we talked about before. But if you have any questions on like how to play this comp or any of the comps that we're going to go over today, definitely leave a comment below, just like maybe say what rank you're at and then what question you have as well, just so I could get a better gauge on like how to answer it. But let's move on into the A tier. So the A tier, these comps are still very solid because again, there are only 3 S tier comps right now, but the A tier is still decent. But let's start off with the Gnar Gadeteen comp. So this comp did get affected by the B patch in a similar fashion to the Lasercorps comp. Pretty much you can't get any of these Gadeteen augments until stage 4, so it's kind of hard to just commit to the comp unless you like just hit an early Nunu. Luckily though, Gnar is still pretty solid just because he stabilizes pretty well in the mid game. And then there are just some games where you just hit the Nunu or you still get the Gadeteen augment on stage 4. You just have to be a little more picky whenever you go for this. But let's move on into some of the ways to play it. So for the emblem and spatula holder, probably like Sona is the best one, and then next up is Morgana. So whoever you have 3-starred, I'd probably just put it on them. And then normally for me, I would really only play this if I get an early Gnar, if I'm like committing really early. If not, I just kind of play the attack damage line. So if we scroll back up a bit, Jhin, Infiniteam, Threats, and Mech Sureshots. And then if I happen to get a Gnar too, then I'll play the Gnar comp. But if not, you kind of just chill unless you like start with a Gadeteen start and then you like kind of just force it from the get-go. Both options are viable. It really just depends on what you draw in that game. One thing that players like to do a lot is stabilize at stage 3-2 at level 6. And you find like either your first copy of Gnar or you try to get a Gnar 2-star. So if you have like a Gnar pair, you definitely want to be rolling on 3-2. And if you have no Gnars and you're forcing this comp, definitely want to roll down until you hit him also. After that, slow roll on level 7, and eventually you'll hit Gnar 3, Sona 3, Morgana 3, Annie 3, and then your team's pretty much complete after that. One random note is that if you do manage to get a Nunu at level 7 is to level up aggressively to level 8, just to put in 5 Gadeteen, because that definitely is a big power spike. Other versions of the comp was the Hacker one, but it's a lot weaker now. you don't really care too much about that. You'd rather just have big boy items on your Gnar. And then you're also able to fit in Morgana because you're not running 3 hacker units, and Morgana is like a built-in Last Whisper a lot of times. For augments, any of the reroll augments are pretty good. The Gadeteen augments are nice. Like Golden Ticket or Think Fast are by far like one of the best ones. And then after that, like healing ones like Thrill of the Hunt, Celestial Blessing are really good for Gnar because, again, he doesn't have the hacker heal anymore. So getting it from like some of the augments definitely helps him out a lot. For hero augments, it's just Temper Tantrum. It's like a lot better than the other one. So Temper Tantrum is the support one, and it's just better than the carry one for some reason. Like, yeah, it's just how it works out sometimes. But that's pretty much the Gnar comp. Probably one of the cooler comps because we didn't really see too much Gnar until like a month ago or something like that. But definitely glad that he's able to find a spot in the set. Next up we have is a classic Oxforce Spellslinger comp. This comp has been played so often, like, wow. This is one of like the default comps that a lot of players rely on, especially at high ratings. They might just play it just to play it, even though it doesn't get wins or anything like that. You could easily top 4 with it in the right situations. And it's just like a good, like, solid go-to because there are a lot of different variations of the build. You could get so many types of different team compositions because of your augments. So if you get like +1 Spellslinger, you could do something different. If you get +1 Oxforce, you could do some goofy stuff. If you get like +1 Star Guardian, you could do even more goofy stuff. So there's just like a lot of different ways or directions that this comp can go into. So there's no like one set way to play it. But probably Echo's like the best holder of those spatula items. But overall, this comp, you really just play around either Twisted Fate or Nico. Both versions work. Most people favor the Twisted Fate. If you go into Nico, you want to run like 4 or 6 Star Guardian. But if you're running like the comp you see here, Twisted Fate is generally the main carry. And then to itemize Twisted Fate, you just build Static Shiv and then just any random items. Notice how like Static Shiv is like highlighted in orange here. Let's take a look at the team comp on the team builder. You could like right click stuff and then make the item core, which I think is pretty cool on like a team builder. So definitely check that out on teamfight.lol if you want to like make your own content or make your own team comps. Let's move on into the how to play section. This team composition revolves around like a standard leveling pattern. So you just play regular TFT, none of the reroll leveling patterns. In case you wanted to do a quick check on like a refresher on leveling, there's like a tab at the header here and you could kind of just like navigate around here. So it's like, oh, the green means like it normally happens. There's like the key up here and then you're like, oh, let me do this for standard leveling. Let me do this for 1 cost reroll, 2 cost reroll, 3 cost reroll, things like that. But yeah, this comp plays pretty much the same as it has from the beginning of the set, so we won't spend too much time on this. Threat comp, this is a great option if you want to go for Bel'Veth or Aurelion Soul carry. Aurelion Soul is like so powerful right now. It's actually incredible. You just put Spear of Shojin plus any ability power items on Ace Soul, and he's going to do a lot of damage. You could run like full threats like you see in this picture here, or run it with the mech frontline, or just run random 4-cost tanks. That also works too. And then attack damage items on your Bel'Veth, and then leftovers on like Urgot Fiddlesticks. Very simple comp, also standard leveling pattern. Next up we have Star Guardian Kai'Sa. This one is more of a reroll comp. So Kai'Sa works pretty similarly to Twisted Fate in that you want the Static Shiv. That's like the only mandatory item. And then you just play around Star Guardian. So 6 Star Guardian and then 2 or 3 quick draw. Some people like 2, some people like 3. I've seen people do like 4 or 5 at the same time if you get like the +1 quick draw augments. But the picture you see here will do more than enough. If you do get Star Guardian Spatula on Misfortune, it's like the best thing ever. But sometimes you just don't get it. So if you're re-rolling for Kai'Sa, you want to slow roll for her at level 7. And then if you're playing Misfortune with the Star Guardian Spatula, you just do standard leveling like the other comps we just went over. One other thing you could do is if you do not have a Static Shiv, you could run Morgana 3-star because she's also a 3-cost unit. So you could re-roll for like Kai'Sa, Nyla, Rel, and Morgana. And then you replace Ezreal with your Morgana, for example. To play this team comp though, I definitely would not go for it unless I have like a lot of copies of Kai'Sa or if I have a Star Guardian Spatula. Not to say it's not good without those conditions, but it definitely like is one of those like surefire signs of like going for this comp. Just because if you don't get it, if you defaulted into the Twisted Fate comp, you'd probably get a little bit better of results if you like built a Static Shiv early on. For augments, it's really just the reroll augments like Golden Ticket, Think Fast, probably Trade Sector added in there. That's pretty much all there is to it, and then any of the Star Guardian stuff as well. Mech Sureshot, this one revolves around Garen as your main tank and then Samira as your main carry. Similar to the Infiniteam build in that you use Samira carry. And don't forget about the Infinity Edge bug with Samira right now. But who knows, maybe they fix it by the time this weekend rolls around. But focus more on tank items whenever you're playing Mech Sureshot, because it's a lot of people, they focus more on the damage items, and like, let's say 70% of the team comps out there, they're like, oh yeah, let me build this mandatory damage item and then like finish up my like carry, but they neglect the defensive items. In this comp, you should do the opposite. Focus more on your defensive items and then have your damage items be secondary, apart from the Last Whisper. You just need Last Whisper. The other 2 Samira items, they don't really matter as long as you have 3 items on your tank. I'd rather have like 2 mediocre items on Samira with 3 good items on my Garen, rather than 3 good items or perfect items on my Samira and 2 mediocre items on my Garen. Even like 2 good items on my Garen. I'd rather have the other scenario where like you have 3 good ones for your Garen. You do have to be a little bit careful though when you play this comp, because the Infiniteam players are going to be stealing your Samiras. Luckily for you, you could run Bel'Veth instead of Samira, or run Asol, or run both with the Mech frontline, and you'll probably do just fine with that, just because the whole point of playing the Mech comp is that you can kind of flex around different carries, which definitely is very useful. So we have like a full list of items for all of those champions down here: Garen, Samira, Ezreal, Bel'Veth, Asol, and that's pretty much all there is to it for this comp. You could also play Underground to get into this comp, which is kind of fun for the big cash outs because you are running Samira, so it's kind of easy to transition into. Next build up we have is Duelists. Duelists definitely took a step down. I find that at the start of every patch, Duelists tend to do well. There was like a B patch that kind of like toned them down a bit, but I've noticed this pattern a lot. Whenever I check the data on like the first day of the patch, Duelists tend to do pretty well just because they're really easy to play, and because Locket is kind of like a stat check on a lot of teams, and when people don't really know how to navigate a patch, like Duelists end up being a lot more powerful. So as the patch goes on, so maybe even like next week, I heard there's a rumor that the future patches, because the World Championship's about to be played, they're not going to change too much about the game. So maybe it's like the end of the reign of Duelists, because not much is going to change next patch, according to rumors. So Duelists will probably get worse as like people get even better on the current patch. But yeah, there's not too much to say about this. Just build Locket, have like a 4 Duelist start, and then just go from there. Build like any item you can on Vayne. You don't have to build like perfect items. You just slam items and Lockets, and that's pretty much how you play Duelist. You get your top 4 and sometimes top 5 and get out. Next build up, we have Anima Misfortune. I'll be doing a full video, like 3-hour video on Anima Squad this weekend, or I'll release it this weekend. So I will actually skip this section because you all should tune in for that one if you want like in-depth class on how to play Anima Squad, because it is one of my favorite comps, probably like my favorite comp of both set 8 and 8.5, just because like bunnies, you know, and then like, yeah, that's pretty much it. Build different. If you get the build different augment, you could definitely go for this. Remember to play duplicates. That's really all there is to this one, and do like standard leveling most of the time. In some other sets, there are like reroll build different comps, but in this set, it's mainly just like standard leveling, play around your aces. So like Samira, maybe run 2 Samiras, and then Misfortune holding AP items, and then Garen or Echo as your main tank, depending on who you 2-star. Next up we have is Ashe Reroll. If you get the Ashe Reroll augment, definitely very powerful, and then you just follow the 1-cost reroll leveling pattern. Next up we have is the Vex Reroll, 3-cost reroll comp. Vex is a little interesting because you're really only running 2 traits, 6 Mascot and 3 Riftwalker. But if you ever get like a +1 Mascot, if you ever get like an early blue buff and an early Vex, definitely something to look into. And there's also like the Supers version, which you can try out with like Malphite, Gangplank, and Lee Sin. Both versions are fine. I think the 6 Mascot one is probably a little stronger though, but if you get like all your 3-stars, don't forget that you can also still go for the Super build. Next up we have is Jax. I really thought Jax was gonna like make a comeback in this patch, but it's turning out to be like pretty bleak for Jax. Not that he's bad, he's just like very situational, and you could really only play him if you get like very specific items for him. You get Jax 2-star really early, or if you get like Jax 3-star really early. So you do have to rely on getting good augments for it. I mean, every comp relies on getting good augments, but this one is even more important, I would say. And then the build, it just spikes at really weird times or odd times and doesn't stabilize as hard as like Gnar, for example, which is why Gnar is probably like a little bit higher on the tier list. That doesn't mean Jax is useless or that there's no situation where you ever want to run Jax. It just means that you have to pick and choose your situations. To play this, you just do 3-cost reroll, so you reroll at level 7, down to 50 gold every single turn, and then like find a time to all in to 3-star all your units. Items for Jax are actually pretty flexible. Like apart from the rapid fire cannon, like the rest, like I've seen all sorts of different combinations. Like obviously Guinsoo's Rageblade and Quicksilver Sash are the best, but you could build just like generic damage items. You could build like a healing item. Some people like Bloodthirster or Hextech Gunblade. You could also build like a Titan's Resolve, and you could even use like Warwick as a secondary carry. So you do have like some other options if Jax isn't working out so much. I've had some games where I'm playing Jax Reroll, and then I'm hard stuck on Jax 2-star because I'm just not seeing him in my shop, even if I'm uncontested, yada yada. But then I just itemize my Warwick, I itemize my like Riven, sometimes I get Riven 3, and then I use that to kind of like eke in like maybe a third or something like that. But next up we have is the Lulu Reroll comp. Pretty solid comp overall. This one's running with supers. Supers are kind of like not played that much on this patch, so definitely take advantage. There might be an even better comp that uses supers than this right now. So if you have thoughts on that, like let me know, because I feel like right now no one's actually playing supers because all the reroll comps in 1-cost don't use them or just aren't very good. Like Ashe Reroll, for example, you play like Lasercorps or like Sureshots. You don't really play supers with that. I mean, you could, like, let's scroll up and look at it. It was over here, like, yeah, we have like 5 Lasercorps, 4 Brawler, but like no super, so it's like a little sad for like the super reroll comps. But let's move on into the next build. That's going to be Yasuo Reroll. So Yasuo also uses the supers, but like 1-cost versus like 2-cost reroll is a little bit different in that, because if you ever get like a 1-1-1 or a 2-2-2, like maybe you're not as contested on the super units. Also, I don't think they're like that critical to the Yasuo reroll comp because you pretty much just play like the Duelists and then you just have the supers as like extras, you know? You could also like play the regular Duelist comp and just put AP items on Yasuo and AD items on your Vayne and do just fine there. Or put like a Static Shiv on your Twisted Fate. That's probably another popular version because it's very similar, or it's like pretty much the same build as the Duelist comp that we see up here. Actually, it's over here. You just put the Locket on your Nyla, the AP items on Twisted Fate, but instead of like a lot of AP items on Twisted Fate, just put the Static Shiv on him and then put the like Jeweled Gauntlets, the Handed Justices, the Quicksilvers on your Yasuo instead. But let's move on into the next build. I believe it's going to be the B tier Hearts Reroll. Yeah, Cleansing Safeguard is pretty bad right now, so I would try to avoid this one. Lucian Reroll. If you get a billion Lucians with like the Lucian support augment, definitely go for this. Jinx Reroll. Still pretty solid. Maybe this one should be like in the low A tier. It's definitely not as good as the Yasuo comp, but if you pick and choose the right situations, it definitely is like decently playable. The thing about Jinx is that in higher ranks, this comp is horrible, but in lower ranks, it's like really, really good relative to other comps. So just keep that in mind whenever you're playing that. Same with the other Anima squad comps for the same exact reason as we talked about before. Draven Reroll, yeah, don't play Draven right now. Unless you like start the game with the Draven 2-star with like combat training. You have to hit a lot of requirements in order to sort of play it right now. And also don't play LeBlanc Hacker. But let's move on into the items. Bow, sword, tier, probably the top tier right now. AD is just kind of king, because if we look at the very top, it's going to be in the S tier like Infiniteam and Jhin. Like even Lasercorps uses AD items. So, and then after that you have Gnar, and then like there's still a bunch of other comps that use it. So AD is definitely the name of the game. So like bow, sword for like Last Whisper and general attack damage items, gonna be really good. Bow can also flex into AP because you could build Static Shiv or Guinsoo's Rageblade. So bow is probably like the best item. I actually prefer tier over the sword, but more people are going for sword right now, again, for the reasons we stated before. I just tend to favor the AP comps, which is why I start tier more often. After that, Negatron's good for mech, belt good for like general flexing, and then yeah, that's going to be it for the items. If we like take a look at the summary again, like definitely lean more towards the AD comps, because like that's pretty much all there is right now. But if you ever get like an ability power start, like just always know that you could pretty much play any version of Spellslinger because there's so many of them. And if you like one trick Spellslinger, you probably could get away with that to get to whatever rank you desire. And if you're curious about what's like S+, S-, A+, A-, instead of just like what's S, what's A, definitely check out the Patreon or the OnlyFans, just because that's where I kind of hold that information. But apart from that, that is going to be it from me for today. But again, in case you missed it, the BunnyMuffins tip of the day is going to be avoid Infinity Edge on your Samira, because there's currently some sort of bug right now. And maybe they hotfix it, maybe they don't, but so go to the video description and you'll find the Discord server there, and I'll let you know if it changes. But that's going to be it from me today. Hopefully you all enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you all next time. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to share and subscribe, and of course smash that like button. Each like is an LP I gain before the next video.